Welcome back to Joe Stunner Boxing. One of the things that a lot of people seem to hang boxing greatness on is the amount of belts that people have won in different divisions, different weight divisions. And there's no doubt that that's an achievement. To win a belt, and not make any successful defenses, it's still an achievement. As I've always said, some people win area titles. Some people, if they get up to English level, they're great. You maximise your talents, but I do think it bears mentioning that you should put some perspective on these fighters that are sort of belt collecting. Now, there are people like Alexander Usyk is a perfect example, who, he's won every single one of his world titles against excellent opposition in their backyards. So the fact that he's been undisputed in 2 weights and won all the belts, been undisputed, yeah, fantastic, incredible fighter. Just as an example, Naoya Inoue is another one. Terence Crawford's another good one. But there are some where you think, really, is that a great achievement? Isn't it a little bit misleading? And I want to mention a few fighters who I think have sort of dined out on belt winning. And they're good fighters, all excellent fighters, but sometimes that's not really. I'm not knocking the fighters. I'm just saying that it can be a little bit deceptive when you look at their records and you look at them in the Guinness Book of World Records, not just boxing records, and they hold titles, and you think yes, but. So we'll start with an obvious example to me is. Adrien Broner, who's been a 4-division world champion. Now, Broner, I think, had a ton of talent, and he pissed most of it away. But he did win belts in 4 divisions, from what was it now? Super feather lightweight, super lightweight, and welter. But does anybody really think he's an all-time great fighter? Even though he's won those titles in 4 different divisions. Who did he beat? Well, I think one of them was Antonio DeMarco, was it? He was a good fighter, but not a great fighter. He beat Paulie Malignaggi for his 147 belt. Malignaggi, good fighter. Not a great fighter, but a very good fighter, And it was a close fight as well. A lot of people thought Malignaggi won. And he won another couple of belts. He won, I can't even remember the name of the one he picked up at 140, I can't remember the opponent. So this is all a little bit, deceptive. It's a perfect example of being deceptive. Now, there are some fighters who are truly great, truly are Hall of Famers, but they've picked up belts along the way where you think, that's a bit, yeah, you're a 5-division world champ, but really? And to me, in my lifetime anyway, the rot set in with Sugar Ray Leonard versus Donnie Lalonde. Now, Lalonde, no one's going to mistake Sugar Ray Leonard for anything other than a Hall of Fame, brilliant welterweight fighter who beat lots of terrific men. But he's a 5-weight world champ. And when he fought Donnie Lalonde, who was a, moderately good, I think it was the WBC light heavyweight champ? He was a Canadian guy. He fought with sort of 1.5 arms because he had a shoulder injury from a hockey accident that meant he couldn't throw one of his, I think it was his left hand particularly well. He was an okay fighter. Nothing wrong with him. He was pretty decent. But to say that he was a, no one would mistake him for one of the great light heavyweight champs. But he held a belt. He won it fair and square, and he held the belt, and he made a defence or 2, and then he fought Leonard. And this was after Leonard had beaten Marvin Hagler in a very, very close fight, controversial decision. I happen to think Hagler won that very narrowly, but it was still a brilliant performance by Leonard, regardless of who you think won. For Leonard to do what he did against Hagler after such a long layoff, one fight in 5 years against Kevin Howard when he was flawed, and he came back to stop Howard. It was still a marvellous performance against Hagler. So he needed a new challenge. Well, it would have been better if he fought Hagler in a rematch, but he wasn't going to do that. So, because he kind of knew that the element of surprise had gone, and Hagler may have been irate enough to really put it on him. But anyway, he takes on Lalonde, and in fact, he drags Lalonde down to 168 to super middleweight, which is a relatively new division in those days. In fact, it was pretty much a very, very new division. And that fight with Lalonde was for the inaugural WBC super middleweight title and the WBC light heavyweight title. So it had two belts on the line. And Leonard was floored early on. I can't remember which round. I want to say the fifth, but it may have been before that. Been the third, fourth, something like that. He got up, and in fact, in the ninth round, he was buzzed by Lalonde, and then he kind of switched on. Leonard had real spite. He had a nastiness about him, and if you tagged him, he'd go to work. And he went to work on the exhausted Lalonde. Not surprising, because Lalonde, a light heavyweight, had been dragged from 175 to 168. So the idea of him having 12 rounds in him was very, very unlikely. But he did have size advantages. Leonard set about him and knocked him flat in the ninth round, I think it was, and collected two belts in that with that one fight against a reasonably talented but somewhat modest world champion. So when people talk about Ray Leonard being a 5-weight world champ, as great as he was, to me there has to be an asterisk by that achievement. Now, more recently, we had Clarissa Shields, who is without question, what's the phrase we'll use? She calls herself the greatest woman of all time. I won't use that stupid acronym. I would dispute that, but she is an excellent female fighter who has no doubt, torn up trees for women's boxing and progressed it. And she comes from a very, very traumatic background. And what she's achieved in boxing and in her life, really, Clarissa, is tremendous, is absolutely tremendous. But she recently became the undisputed women's heavyweight world champ. Okay. And she's only had 2 fights at heavyweight. Now, okay, let's get a bit of perspective here, okay? There are a grand total of 17 professional female heavyweights in the world. 17, 17, not 70, 70. That would be paltry enough, but there were 17. And the 2 fights that Clarissa had were against a lady from Canada called Vanessa Lepage-Joannis, 29-year-old, who came in with 7 wins, 2 by knockout, and 1 defeat, which was a stoppage. And her wins came against, very, very modest opposition. Girls who had, like a 2-0 record, a 2-1 record. She was actually knocked out by Alejandra Jimenez in 3 rounds, who was 8-0. But a lot of Vanessa's victories, 7 victories, are very, very low opposition. And Clarissa knocked her flat, knocked her out in 2 rounds. And Clarissa, as we know, doesn't have one-punch power at all, but she was able to clip Vanessa Lepage-Joannis and knock her out in 2. And then that was in July of last year. She then, this month, February 2025, fought Danielle Perkins, who came in with 5 wins, no draws, no defeats, and 2 KOs. 42 years of age, Miss Perkins is. Now, Miss Perkins, in her 5 wins, had fought, again, we're talking girls who were like 3-2, I think, and 1-0, and 2-1, or maybe a draw. And very, very low opposition. She goes in with Clarissa, and although she was huge compared to Clarissa Shields, she's 6 foot tall. I don't know what tall Clarissa is, 5'7", 5'8", maybe, something like that. I don't know. But she sort of dwarfed Clarissa. But Clarissa had obviously the speed, the skills, and was able to floor Danielle in the final round. And don't forget, these are 10 2-minute rounds. There's no 3-minute rounds, no 12, not even 12 twos, never mind 12 threes. And she outpointed Perkins to become the undisputed women's heavyweight champion. Now, I should also mention that Danielle Perkins weighed underneath the 175 limit, even though she's 6 foot tall. She was underneath. Vanessa Lepage-Joannis also weighed less than 175. So we're really talking, in men's terms, we're talking light heavyweights who probably fought for the heavyweight belts because no one else around, you know. And Clarissa comes up, and obviously, being a skillful girl, even though she's much smaller, she's really just a middleweight, super middleweight at the very most. I would say she's a middleweight, but she mops them all up. Of course she does, because she's a much better fighter. Now, none of that is meant to disparage Clarissa Shields, who, as I say, is a terrific fighter and has done a lot for women's boxing and has achieved a tremendous amount in her life from very, very modest beginnings. You know, I respect that enormously. But are we really going to think of her as being an undisputed heavyweight champion? Really? You know, to me, beating Savannah Marshall in a very close, tight fight where she had to actually ship some punishment in the second half of the fight and walk through it, and she came to Britain not once but twice to face Savannah, that is far more impressive than the two fights at heavyweight. When I say she came she came over to Britain to fight Savannah twice. The first one was cancelled, of course, because of Queen Elizabeth II's death. But she was like, no problem, I'll come back. That's a fighting woman. She won my respect there with that, even though I thought it was a very, very close fight. I don't hold with this idea that Clarissa won it easily. You could actually make a case for a draw or maybe even a point win for Marshall. First half of the fight belonged to Clarissa. Second half, definitely Savannah. And Savannah was putting heavy hands on her. But Clarissa, the speed, I got no problem with her being given that decision at all. But that's a far more impressive victory than, dragging 5-0 Danielle Perkins of 42 years of age over to Flint, Michigan and outpointing her, even though she floored her. And in fact, both her heavyweight fights have been in Detroit, where I believe she's from. I think Clarissa is, she's from Flint, actually. But so look, the point I'm making is I'm not insulting any boxers, but what I'm saying is you've got to put these into perspective. This belt winning thing, jumping up and down weight divisions to collect belts. Does anyone seriously think that the achievements of a lot of these people who have 3, 4, 5 division titles match, say, the achievements of someone like Marvin Hagler? I mean, people would jump up weights in the old days. The most glaring example is Sam Langford, going way, way back, who started off as a lightweight and ended up as a heavyweight, even though he really weighed no more than about 168 at the very most. And he got a draw with Jack Johnson, for Christ's sake. He beat a lot of really Hall of Fame fighters in different weight divisions. Great fighter, Sam Langford. A few of Ray Robinson's opponents. I mean, Ray Robinson himself was really only a light middleweight for most of his career. But he fought at middleweight because it was a light middleweight division, even though it sort of existed on and off at various points of the 20th century, or the first half of the 20th century. You fought at middleweight if you weren't a welterweight. And he fought people who were coming up from welterweight as well. But the weight disparity wasn't that great. So it's always existed, jumping up to win different titles. But let's not get carried away. Let's put a bit of reality on the spin. You know what I mean? Ignore the spin, go for the reality. So that's really just something I thought I'd share with you. Maybe you want to think about it. Maybe you've got some comments, some opinions of your own. Put them in the comment section, of course, as usual. And thanks very much for listening. Subscribe to the channel if you're new. Hit the like button. I'll catch you all later. Bye for now.